Chapter 25. A moment of silence enveloped the couples as they admired the scenery before them. The blue of the Mediterranean is often said to be unique and incomparable. Perhaps the colour of the sky has something to do with it, but whatever the reason for its appearance, the enthralling seascape instantly engulfed both Dan and Malou. They were lost at sea, literally, for within minutes they found themselves huddled against the louvered boards of the hull's hatch in an old sampan. In the middle of some raging ocean, the wind gusts brought with each of them a spray of salt water that soaked their clothes, which now seemed to be painting over their shivering bodies. "Where the hell are we?" Dan blurted between gnashing teeth. "It would be a good idea for you to take the book from under your butt and read what is written," was the answer Damianos hollered from behind them. "Damn you, Damianos, where are we?" Their cat was sitting precariously at the stern of the boat, a hand on the rudder. "We're about 10 miles off the coast of Java, trying to get back to Karita." "Whose bloody idea was this?" Dan shouted over the noise of the swell and lightning strikes. "Not mine, I can assure you," Damianos replied. "Remember, cats don't like water." "And why here and now?" "Dan, please, take the book and see what it says," Malou suggested, her teeth clattering. Okay, but it's going to get wet." "Somehow I don't think a little water spray will affect it," Damianos shouted in reply. Still shivering, Dan pulled the book from under him and sat it over his lap. When he opened it, the wind and the pouring rain stopped instantly. He looked up. "Thank God for that," he muttered, and he meant it. If tolerance, acceptance, patience, determination, compassion, indulgence, and temptation have helped you in forging your way into the future, perhaps endurance will crown your efforts with equal rewards. But remember, enduring the worst of life's torments require perseverance and untamable will. Your dream will be etched in these tasks, and none will be erased once you have attained your goal. Dan closed the book, and as soon as he did, the blackened clouds and the fierce winds resumed their pounding of the little nutshell of a boat, and the book disappeared. "How long do you think we've got to endure that lashing storm?" Malou asked, nestling against Dan's chest. "This is unbelievable." Dan lifted her chin to look up at him. "If endurance is what we need to get out of this mess, let's stay alive and enjoy the rain, okay?" "How can you ask that? I don't think there is anything enjoyable about being lost in the middle of a storm." "No, Malou, we're not lost," Dan said, kissing his wife's forehead tenderly. "We're 10 miles out at sea and trying to return to the beach. We'll be okay, you'll see." Those were reassuring words, but then Malou turned her head to look over the hull's hatch. "Oh God," she cried out. "Have you seen what's out there?" "What? Did you see a sea monster or something?" Dan said jocularly, switching his gaze to where Malou was pointing. "Damianos!" he yelled, standing up. "Did you know about this?" "Not until I found myself at the rudder of this boat, no." "And what's its name?" "That volcano is the child of the one looming behind it. It's called Anak Krakatoa, and it's the most active volcano on Earth." "I can see that," Dan shouted over the noise of another lightning strike, his eyes focused on the pouring lava that illuminated the dark skies with a halo of vapour and red ashes. "And you're saying we're 10 miles off the coast of Java?" Damianos didn't have time to answer when a gigantic wave spread its water over the deck and receded rapidly through the pickets of the railing. "I think we're going the wrong way if I remember my geography lessons," Dan said, crawling now to where Damianos was curled up near the rudder. "That's all I'm aware of, Dan," their cat said, visibly annoyed and perhaps a little afraid too. He definitely feared water. "Maybe I should help you," the voice of a man suddenly interrupted them. He was a little guy with a face that seemed to have been carved out of wood. His speech was vivacious but commanding. He reminded Malou of a leprechaun for some reason. His ragged clothes, as wet as everyone else's were, reeked of fish. "And you were right, Dan, when you said that we're going in the wrong direction." "Who are you?" Dan blurted in response. "Do you have a name?" "Names are unimportant, but knowing that, I am the one who owns the sampan, and the one who can steer it to the shores." Still sitting against the hull's hatch, Malou looked up at him. Somehow she had seen him before, but where she couldn't say at the moment. "Why don't you go below deck, Damianos, and find us some potable water and some oilskins to put on our shoulders?" No one had to ask him twice, for in an instant Damianos was lifting the forward hatch to the stairs, leading to the inside of the hull and disappearing below deck. "Now, as for you, Dan, here comes your exercise in endurance," the wooden-faced man said, grabbing the rudder and bringing it back to steer the vessel eastward. "Here now, you take it, and keep your eyes yonder on the lights of the coast." Without a word, Dan nodded and clasped both hands around the rudder. "Oh God," he yelled. "That thing is hard to handle." As the waves continued crashing onto the deck, Dan's hands clung onto the rudder and focused on the lights for a few minutes, until he noticed that they were now heading directly toward the coast. "Ah, there you are, you little devils!" he erupted at the same moment as the boat went up on one side of the swell and came down the other, as if they were on a roller coaster. "Oh my God, Dan!" Malou cried out. "I don't think my stomach will be able to handle this elevator ride much longer." The little man went to her and crouched down beside her. "Don't be afraid, Malou," he said. "You'll be just fine." "What's your name?" Malou asked in reply. "Chippewa," he said, grinning. "You mean you're the dream catcher?" Malou couldn't have been more astounded. He nodded, stood up, and returned to assist Dan in keeping the rudder from slipping out of his hands. "Dan, did you hear that?" Malou hollered against the deafening sound of rumbling thunder. "Hear what?" "This is Chippewa, Dan. He's the dream catcher." Dan burst out in loud laughter, letting go of the rudder all at once. It swung to its former position, almost capsizing the sampan upon the onslaught of another wave. Chippewa grabbed the rudder back, but it was too late. Malou went sliding all the way to the railing, but fortunately had the presence of mind to grab onto the pickets before being thrown overboard. "Dan! Dan!" she shrieked in desperation as Damianos came out of the hatch. He ran to her and with a snap of his fingers brought her back to safety, behind the hull's hatch. "Oh no! I'm sorry, Malou!" Dan screamed, rushing to his wife's aid and shooting an angry glance to Chippewa. The latter scowled. "This isn't a joking matter, Dan. Your wife almost went overboard because of your unwarranted reaction." "But you're Chippewa," Dan argued, taking Malou into his arms. He whispered, "I'm sorry, hun. I'm so sorry." "So what if I am?" Chippewa shouted. "Does the name or its meaning allow you to endanger your wife's life?" Dan was dumbfounded. "No, it doesn't, but just knowing you're actually here gave it all some meaning." "All right, enough of that," Chippewa said, looking up at Damiano standing in front of him. "Let's get into these oilskins," he added, handing the rudder back to Damianos and taking 2 of the coats to Malou and Dan. "Thanks," Malou blurted, slipping into the garment gratefully. She turned to Chippewa. "It's not Dan's fault, you know." "Yes, it is, Malou, and stop trying to excuse his mistakes. Think about what's at stake here. Dan needs to learn from you. He is impulsive and jovial. But in circumstances such as these, and such as the ones he will be facing in the future, he needs to stay focused on the task, whatever it is or shall be." Dan was about to punch the little guy. "I'll have you know that I don't need anyone to excuse my mistakes," he snapped angrily. "I can recognize when I'm wrong and pay the consequences of my wrongdoing." "Well then," Chippewa said, "let's see if you can put your brain into gear rather than your muscles and try restarting the engine of my boat, shall we?" "I don't know anything about boat engines," Dan retorted, yet when he peered into Chippewa's unwavering gaze, he relented. Okay, where's the darn thing then?" "You'll find it below the hull's hatch. You'll just have to climb down into the cabin and see if you can fix whatever is wrong with it." "Okay then," Dan replied, slipping into the sleeves of the oilskin that Chippewa had handed to him. He hankered down to Malou again. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm a fool. Please forgive me." Without waiting for an answer, he opened the hatch as a wave sent him flying to the prow of the boat. "What the hell?" he yelled. "When is this going to stop?" "Just make your way down to the engine, Dan, and you'll be fine," Damiano said, trying to appease Dan's rising anger and frustration. Okay, Dan yelled as he tried crawling back to the center of the deck. The pouring rain and the incessant up and down motion of the vessel made it difficult for him to reach the hull's hatch. At any moment he felt as if destined to slide overboard as Malou had done minutes before. When he finally reached the hull's hatch, he lifted the top of it, hung on tight to its edges, and swung his body over to jump down and land at the bottom of the hull. "Are you okay?" Malou called down to him after she had watched him clambering over and down the open hatch. "Yes, I'm fine, hun, but I don't think this engine is going to get us anywhere," Dan replied, his voice echoing from below deck. "Why's that?" she asked, bending down to look where Dan was. He pointed to the engine. "The fuel pipe is rotted and water must have gone into the motor." Chippewa had joined Malou by this time. "There's another hose in the toolbox beside the engine," he called down. "Just clamp the new hose into place and connect it to the other tank of gasoline stored near the bow of the boat." "Okay, but don't I have to drain the remaining fuel? If it still has water in it, that motor won't start." Before Chippewa could answer, the frontal assault of another wave practically drowned everyone, including Dan below deck, with enough water to make the oilskins redundant. Hanging for dear life on the edge of the hole's hatch and having fallen to her knees now, Malou yelled, "Do whatever you think is best, Dan, but please hurry, otherwise we'll all drown in the middle of our dream." "You've got to close the hatch, hun," Dan bellowed. "Otherwise whatever I do down here won't be of any use." Without waiting for Malou to cool down with her answer, Chippewa took her hands off the edges of the hatch and closed it. "How is he going to come back up?" she asked him, having noticed that there was no ladder to get back up on deck. "He'll find a way, don't worry," Chippewa answered as he returned to relieve Damianos at the rudder. A quarter of an hour later they heard the engine purr into life. With Malou's cheer and Damianos' grateful smile, they all saw the hatch being pushed open and Dan climbing out of the hole. "Okay, now what?" Dan asked, taking Malou into his arms and looking up at the skies overhead. As if his silent wish had been answered, suddenly the cloud cover dissipated. The rolling thunder drifted away and the swell died down. Looking up at the starlit sky for a moment, Dan then kissed his wife feverishly. "I love you," he whispered in her ear.